to absorb millions and millions of refugees. Poland has seen a jump in their population by 10%. Could you imagine if we had a 10% jump in our population from refugees, what our attitudes might be? If everybody can stay positive and stay helpful and remain supportive, then we do have a real chance of ensuring that civil society practice and not war and the mighty do win. It's very important to our democracy and to our civil society going forward. So let's join the show. We've just joined Twitter Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. And thank you so much for participating. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we'll be discussing learning opportunities provided by children in science museums and how children learn, with special guest Deborah Spiegelman, CEO at the Miami Children's Museum, Carolyn Payson, Executive Director of the Providence Children's Museum, and Matt Sinclair, President and CEO at the Terry Lee Wells Nevada Discovery Museum. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and your questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you for joining us. Caroline, your camera is still, there you are.
I am. Took a second.
No problem. Thanks so much. I'm going to set this up, and we're going to go first to you, Deborah. When you look at hands-on learning for children, it's particularly important, and there's an interactive social component of children's museums that is just totally different than anything that a child would experience within a classroom. There's collaborative learning, it's free form, it's self-navigated, and then of course you get to play with your kids and play with your grandkids, have them play, but also go through steps of learning real concrete skills. So let's start the conversation by taking stock of the advantages of different forms of learning and compare the structured classroom environment to your environment over at the Miami Children's Museum. Deborah?
Well, I think the Miami Children's Museum is unique because we get to see children in a classroom. We are the only children's museum today that has a full charter school. So we have children in formal education from a year old in our preschool up to 5th grade. So we get this exciting comparison on a daily basis because we have 400 children in classrooms. And then we have those same children learning in our informal environment through play. And I think it's very important to talk about the value of play in learning and how children learn by having fun. We have evidence that shows that the curriculum that's taught in the classroom can be brought into our museum gallery where children are excited through the hands-on learning. So I don't think it's taking a choice of one or the other, but the careful integration of formal learning and formal learning through play that's very important.
Now, the workflow is so intimate, right? At your organization, you have a classroom experience in which a teacher is conveying certain knowledge, and then you have a play experience going back and forth. So you're seeing this comparison. When you look at your teachers and how their attitudes, and they come from different places, they come from largely places where they don't have that kind of juxtaposition. How do they see the advantages of being in a charter school that is attached to a children's museum? How do they see the advantages compared to their previous experiences?
Well, the teachers, I think, relate very well to the hands-on experience because the children, every child learns, and the true gift in a teacher is being able to unlock what that child's gift is and how their learning style is best developed. So some children learn through reading, some children learn through verbal communication, and the play in the gallery, the hands-on component reinforces the more formal learning, whether it's verbal or reading. Literacy takes so many forms, and it's something that we have to be aware of and just do the best we can with each child. And I think that what Children's Museum showed parents through the pandemic is to create a fun environment at home. One of the things that we were able to do is create learning packets and help families create that fun environment, because a child sitting in front of a screen for 6 or 7 hours a day, I think we can all agree, just didn't work.
It's not quite the experience that you want. And Matt, your museum is dedicated to teaching science. We're in a real interesting civil society discussion about science, right? I mean, math textbooks are now controversial. We were talking beforehand about jokingly about, when I get my bill at the end, after eating in a restaurant, I can definitely tell whether that math is a Democratic or a Republican math, problem. It's crazy, isn't it? How do you deal with this sort of science teaching in a time of pandemic questioning on the validity of fundamental science?
Yeah, great question. And, for many of us in the Science Museum field, we've enjoyed the fact that by and large, prior to the pandemic, our work was largely viewed as bipartisan and more or less non-controversial.
Neutral, right?
Pretty neutral. So it caught a lot of us, I think, a little flat-footed to suddenly be on the front lines on this, national and international war on science. The mental shift that we made here at the Discovery amongst the staff as we began to see that was to embrace the fact that what we were seeing real time in front of us was the degree of scientific literacy in our nation. And of course, those of us doing this work as science educators, both formal and informal, have known this for a long time. This is one of the many things that we've let decline in our formal side of education. And so we've been making this case for quite some time, but the last 2 years has, I think, given us a real bright spotlight on the need for scientific literacy and engagement. And interestingly enough, a terrible little virus has given us, a great teaching platform in our spaces to engage with our visitors on facts and what is the scientific method and what is this, incredible breakthrough technology that helped us get to an RNA vaccine. What is an RNA vaccine? And just introducing this whole new world of science to folks that is real.
Antivirals, Paxlovid, and those kinds of things. I had COVID recently, and Paxlovid, I tell you, I was headed into a very bad place, and Paxlovid really turned that around. And Matt, you're also talking about this whole idea of another form of learning, social learning, which you can do through play. Caroline, I'd like you to talk a little bit about how we can actually be informed by our kids and how they play together and work together and communicate together before they have a sensibility necessarily on political divisions and cultural wars and all that nonsense, right? Mm-hmm. How do we end up with a situation where children who become youth, who become adults, end up being able to actually talk with each other? Isn't it through that idea of just sort of different people coming together and playing and just sort of getting along and figuring it out?
No, and certainly I think that's one of the core things that, obviously we talk about play being an introduction to learning, and some of that learning is the more formal learning in school, but also the idea of play is sort of that window into social and emotional growth and supporting children's mental health. We've really noticed it, post-COVID, where we're welcoming people back, and we're seeing what has been, kids who have been, for the most part, especially during weekday mornings when we've got very young kids, we might have 3 or 4-year-olds who have not been into a museum before, who have not been in with other little kids. And for some of them, they're terrified, right? They don't know how to interact anymore, but they tend to warm up. But then you've got kids who go from person to person saying, "Will you play with me?" And so I think it is really important that
we need to do that as adults, don't we? We have to go to a person we don't know and say, "Will you play with me? Will you have a discussion? Right. Can we actually be different? And that's okay." Isn't that cool?
It's 100% cool. And how do we give kids that opportunity in a children's museum where they can play and interact, but they, obviously they can't take the toys and go home. So they have to share if they both want to be at the same place. They have to have a conversation. It's really cool that if you start to build something and someone builds on it everybody gets something better, right? And it gives them that opportunity. And we're so excited that, post-pandemic, we've been able to, start that again and have kids interact.
And I think it's also important to see how families as an entire unit are interacting, because so many people were so isolated in their own little bubble for so long. And we've noticed that families are interacting and building upon, and parents had to learn to socialize again. And, think of how long we were in our little bubble.
And then when you take that and then you take objective lessons. For example, if you're sitting there with somebody and you're deciding that looks really interesting, it's a little exhibit about how you can make a paper airplane and how far it can fly. And then you're working with your partner and you're sort of figuring it out, and they disagree with you and they think that it should be something else, and then you decide to make two different paper airplanes and test them out against each other. You're dealing with the scientific method, you're dealing with collaboration, you're dealing with social skills. All of a sudden you start to think, wow, Congress should come to a children's museum, shouldn't they?
Absolutely.
We could do team building.
Well, it's a real thought. We just completed a poll. As a matter of fact, it's still in progress, but I think it's close to being completed. And we said, what kind of learning do children's museums do the best job at advancing? And it's interesting. The majority said tactile, touch, right? Visual also received some social emotional learning. But those were really the three that got it. Matt, is that about how you see it? Is that tactile piece really the key part of this? Because we can't do that on the internet, right? I mean, you can touch a screen, but it's still flat no matter what you see.
Yeah. So in the Science Center model that we practice here, I don't have a visual aid for you, but if you kind of create yourself a funnel or an inverted pyramid, think of the experience in three different layers. We have exhibits and other activities that we do that are attractors. Those are things that draw people in. Maybe you push a button on an exhibit, or you read a text panel, or you do a thing. Our touch points are the broadest at that point, but the depth of learning is probably the most shallow. And then we kind of go into that second tier of engagement. And that's where we draw visitors into maybe a laboratory space or a workshop where they're going to spend 10, 15 minutes in something rather than 15 seconds. And then kind of at the tip of that funnel is this idea of mastery. So maybe they're going to participate in an hour-long workshop or sit through a stage show or demonstration that we have, or tend to camp. The idea is that through these mechanisms, we're just continuing to deepen the engagement and elevate the level of knowledge and information that our visitors are getting. But it is this balanced portfolio. As museum educators, we want every visitor to come in and get to that mastery point and walk out our door the next Nobel laureate. But if all they do is come in and become curious, and we create those aha moments, that's a home run for us. And so having that mix of engagement models in different ways for visitors to sort of self-direct, either by themselves or with their families or whatever group unit they come through, we can meet a visitor wherever they're at and pull them along in that learning journey. And I think that that's really essential to spaces like ours.
Well, I think
could you talk a little bit about your engagement model, because you have this sort of combination, which is very complementary. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, I think in a children's museum, when a child comes in, children learn through repeat experiences. And a child comes in on Monday and will try something one way, and on Tuesday come back. And it's a completely different experience because they're seeing it differently, and children learn again through the repetition and the process of doing something time and time again. Children don't get bored in children's museums. And there's a conversation in our field, and I see Carol smiling about this, but how often do we need to change the exhibits? Are we changing the exhibits for the children? or are we changing them for the caregiver?
Yeah.
And oftentimes we find that the caregiver is the one who's driving and making the decision,
Right.
in essence. So we have to keep our exhibits fresh and exciting, but children learn and they find the discovery fantastic. So
Oh, sorry. I agree with you. And one of the things I would also add is that, we are very child driven, right? The kid can go back. How many times do we have parents say, I went to the Children's Museum and my child would only play with one thing. It's a waste of money. And you have to say, no, it's not, like it's your one chance at the Met and you have to go through every single thing or you've lost it. Really, it's about, they will change every time they go to it, right? They will learn and move on and have a different interaction with every piece in there. So you have to let them have it. But also, just to piggyback a little bit on what Matt said, when we talk about sort of providing mastery or even aha moments, I think one of the things that children's museums needs to own as well is that we are very often that first cultural institution for children. And we know they are going to grow out of us. So really part of our job is to get them used to a cultural institution and be confident in its interactions and understand that it's a place for them no matter what their background is, so that when they go other places, regardless of whether they got free admission because they have a food assistance card or their parents are regular museum goers, they bring that ownership because they started with a place that was driven by them. And that's really
kudos to you, by the way, Caroline, for having a bilingual website. I mean, one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that we have, first of all, we have Children and Discovery Museum deserts in this country, areas of the country where there's no such institution. And then the other piece is that you have kids whose, because of the awkwardness in our society, in terms of people of different backgrounds connecting with each other, people of different languages connecting with each other. We have issues of people, who, for example, who are wearing headscarves and burqas and so on and so forth, not feeling like they can enter into public spaces like a children's museum, or somebody whose family might just speak Spanish or a different language. Not being able to enter in. How do we deal with that aspect to ensure that children in America should basically have access to these very valuable experiences? Caroline, you're investing in this website in the Spanish language piece, and it must be difficult to keep everything up to date in 2 languages.
It is. We decided it was important to us. Providence, although we're in New England City, we're a majority minority city. Providence itself, although the rest of the state might be a little bit different. All of our signage is in Spanish and English as well. We want people to feel comfortable and, again, feel that ownership. I'm going to turn off my camera for 1 second and just very quickly show you our new logo, where we very much wanted for children. We didn't want blue kids or green kids or squiggly line kids or star kids. It was very important for us that every child see themselves reflected in their logo.
That's
so
great.
We worked with the team to do that. So I know representation isn't everything or the only thing, but it's a great starting point. So we try to look at it throughout. We pay our Spanish speaking floor staff an extra $1 an hour to demonstrate that as a skill that we're supporting and paying for. So we're just trying from soup to nuts to make sure that we're valuing it, we're putting it up front, and we want everyone to see themselves here and see themselves included.
And Matt, when we were doing the search that resulted in your hiring over at the Terry Lee Wells Nevada Discovery Museum, we talked with the school superintendent who talked specifically, and it's the 6th largest school district in the nation, right? Talked specifically about the importance of this institution and these institutions in general to creating a level playing field for kids, so that kids actually have all of the opportunity that America promises our children, right?
Correct. And I want to kind of build on what Caroline was saying. While we're not at a place where we've got a bilingual website yet, we're probably about approaching just north of 50% of our exhibits are now bilingual. And and we're on an exhibit master plan to move so that it's 100%. But more importantly than that, when we're doing content development, all of that is originating in Spanish and then being translated to English instead of what is typically done. We create all this stuff, we create it in English, and we hand it over to somebody and say, can you translate this for us? Because there are losses in translation. So everything is organically developed in Spanish and then ported over. But the thing I'm most excited about is that when our visitors are coming in, and as a science center, make no mistake, about 80% of our visitors are going to be families with kids under the age of 12. A lot of my audience overlaps with Deborah's and Caroline's in terms of the demographic. And we work with our local university. I've got 35 part-time employees and that serve as visitor services reps, as our museum education staff, and the University of Nevada is 2 miles up the road from me. Not all, it's not a requirement, but the majority of our part-time staff we've hired through the university in a program called TRIO, which is a program designed to support first-generation minority college students. And so these guys, any student from that program is guaranteed an interview for any job that we have open. And as a result, about 70% of our part-time staff comes out of that program. They are bilingual themselves. They are young adults that look really close to the young adults coming through our door. So,
and you're training the next generation of museum leaders, right?
Correct. And we're thinking about, breaking down the barriers and addressing the issues that come up when segments of our society see institutions like ours and think, well, that's not a place for me. And that's a hard cultural bridge to build, but we're doing the work to get there. Because this
Miami, Deborah, is kind of the center of the bilingual American sensibility, right? Are you?
Well, we went very dramatic.
Approaches?
We have no signage because of the number of different languages and different dialects of Spanish that were spoken. When we opened in 2003, we were fully bilingual with our signs, but yet we offended some people because of the signage and the written word. So through our engagement with Reggio, we went fully no signs. And it's all intuitive. And I'm telling you, I'll go into an exhibit, and if I forgot how we were doing it or what we were doing, just ask a 2 or a 3-year-old, because they are so intuitive and they know where to wave and how to do something. We just reopened our exhibit at Miami International Airport with a new component. And I'm standing in front of it trying to wave and make it work. A child walked in, they got it like that. So we really practice the intuitive. But another important part of children's museums is addressing the different learning styles in children. And when I talk about different learning styles, I'm also talking about children on the spectrum. And a big commitment to our audience is also making every child feel welcome, whether it's through low sensory days or special programs. And we actually have an exhibit in the museum that's multisensory. It's a snoozling room that we created, where children have a complete decompression and an opportunity to adjust the lights and the sounds, because we want every child to feel comfortable. And being in Miami, we have a wonderful, diverse staff and team. So when children come in, they can see a person of color, they can see a person of their same background. And it's a wonderful, engaging opportunity, because if children don't see themselves or families don't see themselves, there can be a level of discomfort. We're really trying to break through that and make everyone feel good.
It's
I
so
think when
interesting.
I first started working in museums, I was, the term that was used all the time was access. And are you providing access for people? And I would say that increasingly everybody has done everything they could to do that in terms of, free tickets or free, anything like that. But I think one of the things we've all learned is that access is nothing without invitation. And that invitation is implicit in how welcome people feel, and that's really the place where we need to be.
It's so interesting what you're all describing. You're taking different cuts at this idea of meeting people where they are. I want to remind our viewers that if you look at Apple, the Apple iPhone, the design of the Apple iPhone was specifically shaped so that you don't need written instruction in order to use it, right? It's so very elegant. If you go through any international airport, particularly in areas where there's a lot of multilingualism, like in Europe, it's all done through icons rather than words, because they don't know who's going to be walking through and whether they can understand the language of necessity. So there are times and places for written word, spoken word, for icons, for the facility to lower the temperature, lower the light, lower the sound. There are different ways of approaching this. And if we can think about the wisdom in these different approaches, for example, the design of the most popular consumer electronic line that the world has ever seen, right? We can suddenly have our mindset shifted as adults. We're getting to the end of our time here. I'd like each of you to comment. We're going to continue with Caroline, go to Deborah, and give Matt the last word on how the interactions function with the adults here. Deborah, you had said that, and Caroline, you had nodded vigorously about sort of the who drives the change, the agenda for changing exhibits and so on. But Caroline, could you talk a little bit about the role of adults within your environment and outside of your environment, and how you think about advancing that role in a productive way in the interests of the learning of children and families?
No, sure. Our visitors need rides. They can't get there by themselves. So obviously the adults are super important there. And we are adamant that we are not a place, we're not the ballroom at IKEA. You can't just drop your kid off and let them interact, right? We try to model with our staff that a parent should be interacting. I mean, clearly, we probably all pay the electric bill by having people who need to get out of the house and put the kid in a room and just sit there and catch up on their phone. That's okay if they need that support, but we also try to provide opportunities for kids to work with their parents and to have them see that they can, work on a hands-on activity together. Or again, it's this idea that anyone can do an activity by themselves, but when two people do it, it increases what can happen exponentially. The number of solutions to a problem, the quality of the solutions in the work. So we try to sort of demonstrate that.
And Deborah, do you shape experiences for your parents that then redound to the benefit of children as well? Is that part of your brief?
We engage the family engagement. We promote family engagement. We do not have Wi-Fi in our building for our visitors. And it's a conversation we enter into probably on an annual, if not biannual basis, because we don't want parents on their cell phones. We want people to let go of the outer world and come in and engage and have the experience together. Sometimes we get some pushback, but I think it's a great experience. We also took away most of our seating throughout the museum to encourage the family engagement.
One of the things that I think is so interesting about these two different approaches is that on the one hand, you have accommodation. On the other hand, you have a little bit of structure, which is not.
We believe kids are VIPs.
Right. So there's not the message that you're sending is that there's not just one solution. And I think that that's really important, that we accommodate different ideas and perhaps go into our place of a bit of discomfort, like we can't always be tied to our devices, right? Which is what you're saying, Deborah. Or maybe we just need a break, which is what you're saying, Caroline. Matt, take us out with your approach over the Terry Lee Wells Nevada Discovery Museum.
Sure, no pressure there at all. Listen, there is no better model for learning for our youngest visitors than to see the adult in their life engaged in learning and asking questions and failing and learning from that failure and trying again. We can and we do spend millions of dollars building these incredible exhibits and spaces, and they're beautiful and they're great. But that end game is to create that environment where everybody is engaged. That's the home run for us. And in one form or another, all three of us are doing that in our spaces.
So you're basically, you and I think that your colleagues view as your mission, partly to model a way of behaving, a way of acting, a way of learning, a way of relating across generations, but also within generations, in a collaborative, peaceful, joyful way, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this fantastic knowledge, this fantastic experience. Deborah Spiegelman, CEO of the Miami Children's Museum, Caroline Payson, Executive Director of the Providence Children's Museum, and Matt Sinclair, President and CEO of the Terry Lee Wells Nevada Discovery Museum. Thank you so much for sharing your different approaches across the nation. Thank your boards, thank your staffs, thank your constituents, thank your volunteers, thank your funders. And we're going to be talking on next Tuesday about a related issue, which is animal therapy, using animals to help children, help adults overcome trauma, and to create another type of connection. Please join us. Everybody stay healthy, have a great day, and thank you all. Thank you for helping us expose these